He went out looking for lost cattle, and found something the church tried to erase. Stay with me, because this story proves silence can be more dangerous than sin. Ethan Crowley had ridden this stretch of Kansas prairie 1,000 times before. By late summer, it always looked the same: sun-bleached grass bowing under the heat, cicadas screaming like they were being paid to keep secrets, the horizon trembling as if the land itself were tired of standing upright. At 58, Ethan no longer expected surprises from the open range. He expected dust, heat, and the slow work of a man finishing another quiet day alone. His cattle had wandered again. That was all this ride was meant to be. No trouble. No people. Just a widower and his horse moving through a land that asked nothing and promised even less. Then he saw something dark lying ahead in the grass. At first, he squinted and figured it was a carcass, maybe a coyote or a deer struck down by heat or thirst. It wasn't unusual this time of year. But as his horse drew closer, the shape didn't stay still the way death usually does. It shifted. Barely. Like a breath fighting to be remembered. Ethan pulled hard on the reins. Lying there in the open prairie was a young woman. A nun. She was stretched on her side, black habit torn and dust-caked, her bare feet blistered and bleeding as if she had walked straight out of hell and kept going. One sleeve was ripped nearly to the shoulder. Her hands trembled against the ground, fingers digging weakly into the grass like she was afraid the earth might swallow her if she let go. Ethan dismounted fast, boots hitting the dirt as he dropped to one knee beside her. The heat rolled off her in waves. Fever heat. Flight heat. The kind that came from running too far with nowhere safe to stop. Her lips moved. At first, he thought it was just the wind. Then he leaned closer. That is, forbidden. The words barely made it out. Not a warning. Not a command. A plea. Ethan froze. He'd seen fear before, men staring down gun barrels, boys crying over shallow graves, but this was different. This fear wasn't aimed at him. It was aimed inward. At rules. At punishment. At being seen where she wasn't meant to exist. When he reached for her wrist to check her pulse, she flinched hard, eyes flying open in terror. Blue eyes. Young eyes. And behind them, something broken that had been breaking for a long time. I'm not going to hurt you, Ethan said quietly, his voice rough from years of little use. You're safe. She didn't answer. Her gaze flicked past him, toward the empty horizon, as if she expected riders to appear any second. Only then did Ethan notice everything else: the swollen ankles, the cracked lips, the way shame curved her body inward like she was trying to disappear even while lying in plain sight. This girl hadn't collapsed by accident. She had run. And she had run from something that didn't stop at fences. Ethan straightened slowly and scanned the land. No dust trails. No riders. But danger didn't always announce itself. Sometimes it arrived later, wearing smiles and asking questions. If townsfolk found her like this, alone with a rancher, unconscious in the grass, her life wouldn't just be ruined. It could be erased. Ethan didn't hesitate. He slid one arm under her knees and one behind her back. She weighed almost nothing. When he lifted her, her fingers clutched his shirt weakly, like she was holding on to the last solid thing in the world. As he settled her onto his horse and started back toward his ranch, a familiar heaviness settled in his chest. The feeling he got when he knew he was stepping into something that would not let him walk away unchanged. He had spent years minding his own business. Burying grief. Avoiding storms. But as the prairie swallowed the path behind them, one question followed him like a shadow. What truth is so dangerous, that a nun would rather die in the open prairie than return to the church? Ethan's cabin sat alone at the edge of the range, far enough from town that no one came by unless invited, or lost. It was a simple place. Weathered wood. One small window. A stove that worked more from habit than kindness. The kind of home built by a man who never planned on anyone else living there. Ethan laid the young nun on his bed with care, like she might shatter if set down too hard. He kept his movements slow and distant, giving her space even while doing what needed to be done. He soaked a cloth and laid it across her forehead. Her skin was burning. Heat exhaustion, maybe worse. When she stirred, it happened all at once. Her eyes snapped open and she tried to sit up, panic flooding her face as she took in the unfamiliar room, the bed, the walls, the man standing a few steps away. She pulled the blanket tight around herself, breath coming fast and shallow. "No," she whispered. "Please." "I didn't." "Easy," Ethan said, backing up another step so she could see his hands were empty. "You passed out in the prairie. I brought you here so you wouldn't die out there." Her eyes darted to the door. Then back to him. Fear tightened her jaw, not fear of being hurt, but fear of being wrong. Of being seen in a place she had been taught was forbidden. "I shouldn't be here," she said, voice shaking. "Alone. With a man." Ethan nodded slowly. "I won't touch you unless I have to. And if you want me gone, I'll step outside." That stopped her. No order. No threat. No expectation. Just a choice. Her breathing slowed, little by little. She took a sip of water when he offered it, hands trembling so badly he had to steady the cup, but only for a moment, only at the rim. When she finally spoke again, her voice was barely louder than the crackle of the stove. "My name is Sister Miriam." "Miriam," Ethan repeated, as if saying it anchored her to the room. "I'm Ethan Crowley. You're on my ranch. No one knows you're here." Relief flickered across her face. Then guilt. Then something heavier. She stared at her hands for a long time before the words came out. "I didn't run from God." Ethan didn't interrupt. "I ran from men who hide behind him," she continued. "Men who wear kindness like a coat and rot underneath." Her shoulders began to shake, though she didn't cry. "Not yet." "At the mission," she said, "things were wrong. Money meant for orphans never reached them. Supplies disappeared. Girls were sent away for service and never written of again. Questions were answered with scripture and silence." "I found the records," Miriam whispered. "Ledgers. Names. Payments that didn't belong to God or the poor." She had shown them to another sister. An older woman. "Brave." "The next morning," Miriam said, voice breaking, "they told me she had left on her own. No goodbye. No note. Just, gone." Ethan felt something cold settle in his chest. "The priest and the sheriff," she went on. "They speak together. Eat together. Protect each other. Power protects itself." When she finally looked up, tears spilled freely. "I knew if I stayed, I would disappear too." Silence filled the cabin. Not empty silence, but heavy, shared. Ethan turned toward the window, jaw tight. After a long moment, he spoke. "My wife needed help once," he said. "The doctor in town turned her away. Said we couldn't pay enough. I didn't argue. Didn't fight. I stayed quiet." He swallowed. "She died 2 days later." Miriam's sob caught in her throat. Ethan faced her again, eyes steady now. "Silence has a cost. I learned that too late." He leaned forward slightly, careful not to crowd her. "If you speak the truth," he said, voice low and firm, "you won't stand alone." It wasn't a promise of love. It was stronger than that. It was a vow. They left before sunrise. The prairie was still blue with early light, the air cool enough to fool a man into thinking the day would show mercy. Ethan rode ahead, steady in the saddle, while Miriam followed close behind. She wore no veil that morning. Instead, Ethan had handed her an old trail hat, sun-faded, soft at the brim, too big for her head. She hesitated before putting it on. When she did, something shifted. The habit was still there, the vow still heavy on her shoulders, but the hat changed how she held herself. It shaded her eyes. Gave her a small, human kind of cover. Not hiding, choosing. They rode in silence for a time, hooves thudding softly against the dirt. When the rooftops of Dodge City finally appeared on the horizon, Miriam's hands tightened on the reins. "This won't be clean," Ethan said, not looking back. "The sheriff won't arrest himself. The priest won't confess. And the truth," he paused, choosing the words carefully, "the truth always costs something." Miriam nodded. She already knew the price. She'd paid part of it with blood and miles. As they entered town, heads turned. A missing nun never stays missing for long. Whispers followed them like dust. Some curious. Some angry. Some afraid. Miriam kept her eyes down, the brim of the hat low, but she could feel recognition crawling across her skin. She was the wrong kind of miracle, one people hoped would stay buried. They hadn't made it halfway down the main street when Sheriff Harlan Boone stepped out from the shade of the jailhouse. He smiled. It was the kind of smile that never reached the eyes. "Morning, Crowley," Boone said easily, hand resting near his holster. "Didn't expect to see you riding in with stolen church property." Miriam flinched. Ethan stopped his horse and dismounted, slow and deliberate. "She's not property," he said. Boone's gaze slid to Miriam. Calm. Measuring. "Sister," he said gently, "you've caused quite a stir. Folks have been worried." Her chest tightened. The old fear surged back, obedience drilled into bone, punishment waiting behind polite words. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. Then the mission doors opened. Father Malcolm Reed stepped into the sunlight. He looked just as he always had in town, clean robes, peaceful expression, hands folded like a man with nothing to hide. But his eyes were cold. Calculating. They fixed on Miriam like she was something misplaced. "There you are," he said softly. "Come now, child. You're confused. We'll speak inside." He took a step toward her. Miriam's knees nearly gave way. Ethan moved without thinking. He stepped between them, broad shoulders blocking the priest's path. "She's not going anywhere with you," Ethan said. The smile slipped from Boone's face. "Just a little." "Careful, Crowley," the sheriff warned. "You're standing in the middle of something you don't understand." "I understand enough," Ethan replied. A small crowd had gathered now. Storekeepers. Riders. Townsfolk pretending not to watch while watching everything. The air tightened. You could feel it, like the moment before a storm breaks. Boone's hand drifted closer to his gun. Reed's voice stayed calm. "You're making a mistake." Miriam stood frozen behind Ethan, heart pounding so loud she was sure they could hear it. Fear clawed at her throat, begging her to step back, to disappear again. But this time, she wasn't alone. The town held its breath. Guns near hands. Lies near collapse. And somewhere between them all, the truth waited to see who would move first. For a long moment, no one moved. The air in front of the mission felt brittle, like it might shatter if someone breathed too hard. Sheriff Boone's fingers hovered near his holster. Father Reed stood perfectly still, hands folded, face calm enough to pass for holy. Miriam stepped forward. At first, her voice barely carried past Ethan's shoulder. "I won't go inside," she said. A few heads turned. The priest's brow creased, just slightly. "Miriam," he said gently, "you're tired. Confused. This is not the place for—" "I am tired," she interrupted, and her voice grew stronger, steadier. "But I am not confused." Her hands shook, but she didn't step back. "You told us the mission had no money," she continued. "That God would provide. But I saw the books. I saw donations meant for orphans paid to saloons. I saw names crossed out when girls stopped asking questions." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Reed's smile tightened. "Child, you should be careful with accusations." "I am being careful," Miriam said. "Careful because the last sister who spoke to me disappeared the next morning." Silence slammed down like a hammer. A man near the feed store shifted uncomfortably. "My wife works the kitchen," he said. "She said supplies kept vanishing." A shopkeeper stepped forward, jaw clenched. "The mission owes me 3 months' payment. I was told to wait on the Lord." A woman in the crowd gasped, pressing a hand to her mouth. "My daughter was sent to help at the mission," she whispered. "She never came home. You told me she ran away." Father Reed's calm cracked. Sheriff Boone swore under his breath and yanked his gun free. "That's enough." The moment shattered. People screamed and scattered as Boone raised the weapon. Before he could fire, 2 ranch hands lunged, slamming into his arm. The shot went wild, exploding into brick above the mission door. In the chaos, Father Reed turned and ran. He made it 3 steps. The shopkeeper and another townsman tackled him inside the doorway. The impact sent the mission doors flying open. A metal box spilled from a cabinet, bursting across the threshold. Ledgers. Loose bills. Papers fluttering like wounded birds. An old woman knelt, picking one up with shaking hands. "This is money for orphan relief," she whispered. "Sent to a gambling house." Gasps spread. Page after page told the same story. No sermon could explain it away. Boone struggled, but hands dragged him down. The priest shouted, but no one listened anymore. Ethan stood still. He didn't throw a punch. Didn't draw a weapon. The truth was doing the fighting for him. By the time the dust settled, Boone was disarmed and held fast by men who no longer feared his badge. Father Reed was dragged back into the light, his robes torn, his power stripped bare. Justice wasn't clean. It never was. But it had turned its face toward the light. And this time, it didn't look away. The town felt different once the shouting stopped. By sundown, Sheriff Harlan Boone sat behind iron bars in his own jailhouse, watched by men who used to lower their eyes when he passed. Father Malcolm Reed was taken from the mission under guard, his gentle voice gone, his name stripped of the reverence it once commanded. No prayers followed him. Only the sound of doors closing. Justice did not arrive on a white horse. It arrived tired, late, and carrying ledgers instead of guns. Miriam was no longer hunted. She gave her statement that night, voice steady, hands still shaking but no longer empty. She was not a runaway nun anymore. She was a witness. And in a town that had lived too long on silence, that mattered. Some expected her to leave once it was done. To disappear the way she had once tried to. She didn't. Miriam stayed at the mission, not because she was ordered to, and not because she owed anyone anything, but because she chose to. Records were sorted. Doors were opened. Food reached the hungry it had always been meant for. The mission didn't become perfect. But it became honest. And that was a beginning. Ethan Crowley returned to his ranch the next morning. The prairie welcomed him back the same way it always had, quiet, wide, indifferent. He went back to mending fences, checking cattle, living the life he had built to keep the world at arm's length. But every Saturday evening, as the sun dipped low and the land turned gold, Ethan saddled his horse and rode into town. He didn't announce himself. He didn't expect anything. Sometimes Miriam was there, sleeves rolled up, hands dirty with work. Sometimes she was tired. Sometimes she smiled when she saw him waiting by the fence. They didn't rush. They didn't promise. What grew between them wasn't born from rescue or debt, but from standing in the same fire and refusing to step away. Sometimes love doesn't save. Sometimes it just stands still long enough for the truth to survive. If you were Ethan, would you have stayed silent, or risked everything to protect the truth? Tell me your answer in the comments. And for more powerful, cinematic Wild West stories like this, subscribe to Frontier Tales and ride with me.